In a Muaka village, life moved with the rhythm of cockcrows and pounding mortars. Children played in the dusty red earth, their laughter echoing through compounds. Women fetched water from the stream, balancing calabashes on their heads with a grace that came from years of practice. Men gathered under the big udala tree, discussing palm wine, politics, and the price of yam in the next market. But among all these daily scenes, there was one figure that stood apart, Adana, the woman with the calabash. Nobody in the village could remember when she first appeared. Some swore she had always been there, others whispered she came one Harmattan morning when the fog was so thick you could barely see your own shadow. She was tall, with skin as dark as roasted palm kernel, and her eyes, sharp, bright, and unreadable, seemed to know more than they should. She never spoke much, but everywhere she went, she carried one old, brown calabash. The calabash was different from the ones other women used. It was not for fetching water, nor for keeping palm wine. Its surface was carved with strange markings, spirals, stars, and tiny figures that seemed to shift if you stared too long. Children often whispered that if you pressed your ear close to it, you would hear voices, like people quarreling inside. But nobody dared to test it, except Ngozi. Ngozi was only 12, with restless eyes and a spirit that refused to be quiet. She was the type who always asked questions, who followed the hunters when they went into the forest, who climbed trees higher than any boy in the village dared. The elders shook their heads and told her mother, "This girl is too stubborn." One day,
Curiosity go put you for trouble one day, this pikin.
Curiosity that made her notice Adana more than anyone else did. Whenever Adana passed, people gave way. Some greeted her respectfully but quickly moved aside, as if afraid to linger. Children ran into their mothers' huts when they saw her shadow stretching long at dusk. Even the village dogs barked once and then hid their tails between their legs. But Ngozi watched. She noticed how Adana never allowed the calabash to touch the ground. Ngozi also noticed how Adana often disappeared into the forest paths when the moon was high, her figure swallowed by the trees.
As if two voices were speaking through the smoke.
Nobody ever asked where she went. One evening, as the sun bled into orange across the horizon, Ngozi followed her. She kept her steps light, her small feet barely raising dust. Adana walked slowly but with purpose, her wrapper tied tightly, her head covered with a faded scarf. The calabash glowed faintly in the dying light, almost as if the carvings held fire beneath them. The path led toward the river Obimalai, the river nobody visited after dark. Old stories claimed the river carried not just water but also the voices of ancestors. Ngozi's heart pounded, but she pressed on, hiding behind bushes whenever Adana paused. At the riverbank, Adana knelt. She placed the calabash on her lap, closed her eyes, and began to hum softly. Ngozi froze. The sound was not like ordinary humming. It was deep, layered, as if two voices were coming from her mouth at once, one hers, the other older, heavier, carrying echoes that did not belong to the living. The air thickened, the river rippled though no wind blew. Ngozi strained her ears. And then, she heard it, voices. They were not coming from Adana's lips. They were rising from the calabash. Low at first, then louder, overlapping, like market women quarreling over change. Men's voices, women's voices, even children's voices, all mixing, telling stories, arguing, weeping. Ngozi's knees weakened. She grabbed a tree trunk to steady herself. Every instinct told her to run back home, but her curiosity chained her to the spot. Suddenly, one voice rose above the others. It was sharp, angry, commanding. "Let me out!" Ngozi gasped. She clamped her hand over her mouth, afraid Adana might hear. But Adana's eyes remained shut, her humming grew louder, her hands pressing the calabash firmly as if holding something back. The river churned, the ground trembled slightly, and the carvings on the calabash glowed brighter. Ngozi stumbled back, her heart hammering. What was inside that calabash? Were they spirits? Were they stories, as people whispered? Or was it something darker? Adana suddenly opened her eyes. They glowed faintly, reflecting the river's shimmer. Slowly, she turned her head toward the bushes.
The world is not ready yet for us. That is why.
For a long moment, woman and girl locked eyes. The night air thickened with silence, broken only by the restless river. Then Adana's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, and she whispered in a voice that sent shivers down Ngozi's spine. Since you have listened, you must now follow. Ngozi's legs felt heavy, like yam tubers tied to her ankles. The words, "Since you have listened, you must now follow," echoed in her ears again and again. Adana rose from the riverbank, her movements calm but deliberate. She lifted the calabash, balanced it on her arm, and began walking, not back toward the village, but deeper into the forest. Her wrapper brushed against leaves, her steps silent as if the earth itself dared not disturb her. Ngozi hesitated. Every part of her body screamed at her to turn and run home, but her heart was stronger. Curiosity burned inside her like pepper soup too hot to swallow. She swallowed hard, then tiptoed behind, careful to keep a little distance. The forest was different at night. The crickets' cries sounded sharper, owls hooted from unseen branches, and shadows grew long and strange. The moonlight slipped through the trees in silver slants, painting the path ahead. Ngozi wrapped her arms around herself, wishing she had carried a lantern. Adana did not look back. After what felt like forever, they arrived at a clearing. In the middle stood an ancient irako tree, its branches stretching wide like the arms of a giant. Ngozi crouched behind a cluster of bushes. The air smelled of earth and smoke, though no fire burned nearby. Her breath shallow. Then she heard it again, the voices. Through her very bones. Ngozi pressed her hands against her ears, but the voices seeped through her skin. This time, they were clearer. Suddenly, one voice boomed above the rest. A deep, commanding baritone that made the ground vibrate. Why do you keep us locked, Adana? Ngozi's eyes widened. Was the calabash truly talking? Adana's lips parted. Her reply was firm, steady. Because the world is not ready for all of you, not yet. She had never heard anything like this in her life. Stories that spoke, spirits begging for freedom? Then something strange happened. One of the carvings on the calabash lit up brighter than the rest. The shape of a bird, wings outstretched, began to glow with fiery light. From within, a high-pitched voice cried out, "I will be heard tonight." The calabash shook violently. Adana pressed her hands harder, sweat beading her forehead. "You will stay," she commanded, "not yet." But the calabash rattled louder. The bird carving pulsed, and a faint shape rose like smoke from the opening. Ngozi gasped. A spirit bird. It flapped once, twice, and the wind roared through the clearing, scattering dry leaves. Adana stretched her hand toward it, her voice sharp as a cutlass. "Back inside!" But the bird screeched and flew higher, circling above them. With every beat of its wings, the irako tree groaned, and sparks of light showered the ground like fireflies. Ngozi's heart pounded. She clutched the bush tighter. Part of her wanted to run, but part of her wanted to see how this would end. Then, suddenly, the bird turned its glowing eyes on her. Ngozi froze. It let out a cry so piercing that it cut through her chest like a knife. Her ears rang, her vision blurred. She stumbled forward into the clearing, unable to hide anymore. Adana's eyes snapped open. Her gaze fell on Ngozi, but instead of anger, a strange calm filled her face. "You see?" Adana said softly, though her voice carried like thunder. "The stories have chosen you too." The spirit bird swooped down, circling above Ngozi's head. Its feathers shed sparks that fizzled in the air. Ngozi could not move. She felt the voices rising all around her, pressing against her skin, whispering into her ears. The carvings dimmed, the voices faded, and silence returned to the clearing. Ngozi collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving. Adana walked toward her. "From this night, Ngozi," she said, "your ears will never be the same. You have listened to what others cannot hear." Ngozi shivered, the night felt colder. But deep inside, beneath the fear, something else stirred, a strange excitement. Because she knew, her life in Amuaka village would never be ordinary again. The next morning in Amuaka village, life seemed to move as usual. But for Ngozi, nothing felt the same. Her ears still rang faintly with the echoes of the voices from the calabash. Every sound she heard, her mother's laughter, the rustle of palm leaves, the call of a hawker, seemed sharper, fuller, almost as if each one carried a hidden story. But she could not tell anyone. That a spirit bird had almost swallowed her voice? Her mother would beat her for telling lies, and the elders would warn her never to follow Adana again. Yet, in her heart, she felt tied to the woman. By evening, she found herself standing near the edge of the forest path again. And as if the spirits themselves had arranged it, Adana appeared. Her wrapper was freshly tied, her scarf neat, and of course, the calabash rested firmly against her arm. Their eyes met. Ngozi expected a rebuke, but Adana only said, "Follow me." This time, there was no need for hiding. They walked until they reached River Obimalai again. The sky above was painted with the last strokes of sunset, purple and gold fading into deepening blue. Fireflies danced above the water, their light reflecting on the ripples like scattered stars. Ngozi stood nearby, nervous but eager. "Do you know why the river is called Obimalai?" Adana asked, her voice calm. Ngozi shook her head. "Because it carries the hearts of many words. Long before you were born, before even your mother's mother, this river was where forgotten stories came to rest. That is why the water never dries." Ngozi leaned forward, eyes wide. "And your calabash?" Adana's gaze deepened, like the river itself. "Some stories are too heavy for the world to carry. Too bitter, too dangerous. Yet they must not be lost. That is why I carry them." As she spoke, she lifted the calabash and dipped its bottom lightly into the river. At once, ripples spread out in perfect circles, and the water began to shimmer with strange light. Ngozi gasped. She could see faces in the water. They appeared faintly, like shadows beneath the surface, men with crowns of coral beads, women with hair braided in ancient styles, children laughing, warriors beating drums. "What are they saying?" Ngozi whispered. Adana tilted her head. "Listen with your spirit, not just your ears." Ngozi closed her eyes. At first, only the river's gurgle filled her mind. Words she did not understand, words in tongues older than her village. But then, slowly, she began to hear. Some sounded like warnings, others like prayers. Her heart beat faster. She opened her eyes and gasped again. They shimmered, rearranging themselves into shapes, first a bird, then a tree, then a crown. Yes, words are never truly lost. Even when forgotten, they live on. That is why the calabash must carry them, before they turn into shadows that consume the living. Ngozi stared at the calabash, her mind buzzing with questions. Why her? Why had the voices called her the previous night? Was she now part of this burden? Before she could speak, the river stirred violently. The water darkened, the faces vanished, and a new sound rose, a deep, mournful wail. The letters reappeared, but this time they twisted into shapes of chains and fire. Adana's expression grew grave. She pressed the calabash tighter against her chest. A story that should never be told. It is trying to escape. The water surged, splashing onto the bank. Adana raised the calabash high, chanting words Ngozi did not understand. The carvings on it flared with light, and slowly, the river's rage calmed. The wailing faded, silence fell again. Ngozi sank to the ground, her body trembling. Adana looked at her, her expression softer now. "This is why you must be careful," she said. "Every story carries a weight. Some can heal, some can destroy. And once you have heard them, you can never return to being ordinary." Ngozi swallowed hard. Her small voice trembled as she asked, "Then why? Why me?" Adana's gaze held her firmly. "Because, Ngozi, the stories have chosen you. And stories never choose without reason." The girl shivered again. But deep inside, beneath her fear, she felt it, like a spark lighting in her chest. For several nights after visiting River Obimalai, Ngozi could not sleep well. She would toss and turn on her raffia mat, staring at the thatched roof of her mother's hut, hearing whispers that no one else seemed to hear. Sometimes, the whispers were gentle, like lullabies. Other times, they rose into sharp quarrels that made her cover her ears. Her mother thought it was
scared.
ordinary
I know, my
childhood
child. I'm
restlessness.
here.
Will everything be okay?
Ngozi,
Yes,
if you don't
I
sleep,
promise.
I will send you to fetch water at midnight, she would warn. But sleep would not come. The voices followed her like shadows. By day, she moved like every other child, helping to pound fufu, wash dishes by the stream, and carry firewood. But deep inside, she knew she was no longer like the others. The river had marked her. Adana's words haunted her. "Once you have heard them, you can never return to being ordinary." It was on the fifth night that something shifted. Ngozi was returning from her grandmother's hut, where she had been sent to deliver roasted plantain. The moon hung heavy in the sky, bathing the footpath in pale light. From a distance, she saw her, the tall, lean figure of Adana, sitting alone at the edge of the village square. The calabash rested on her lap, and her head was bowed. Ngozi's curiosity flared. She slowed her steps, then quietly hid behind a clay water pot near a compound wall. From her hiding place, she watched. Adana was humming again. The same layered humming that carried more than one voice. The calabash shimmered faintly, and Ngozi felt the air tighten. Then it happened, the calabash trembled. A faint crack appeared on its surface, not enough to break it, but enough for a thin stream of smoke to escape. The smoke twisted upward, curling like a snake, before forming into the shape of a child. Ngozi's breath caught in her throat. The smoke child stood there, thin and glowing, its eyes hollow yet full of sadness. It opened its mouth, and a cry escaped, a cry so heart-wrenching that it pierced the still night. Dogs barked, babies inside huts began to wail. Chickens flapped in fright. Adana's eyes widened. "No," she whispered, clutching the calabash tighter. She began to chant, her voice urgent. But the smoke child shook its head. "I will not be forgotten," it wailed. "I will walk again." The cry grew louder, and with it, strange things began to happen. The air turned cold, though it was dry season. The fire in nearby huts dimmed, as if choked. Palm trees shivered without wind. Ngozi covered her mouth with both hands, terrified. She wanted to run, but her legs refused to move. Suddenly, the smoke child darted toward the village paths. Its cry echoed through compounds, and with each echo, crops in the nearby farmlands seemed to wilt. By morning, yam leaves would be found curled and yellowed, cassava stalks bent low as if under unseen weight. Adana leapt to her feet, lifting the calabash high. "Come back," she commanded. "Your time is not yet." The smoke child laughed, a chilling sound. It darted from one end of the square to another, scattering shadows, until finally, with a shuddering cry, it disappeared into the ground. The night fell silent again. But the silence was not peace. It was heavy, uneasy, like the pause before thunder. Adana sank onto the ground, clutching the calabash. For the first time, Ngozi saw fear in her eyes. Not anger, not calm, but fear. She whispered to the calabash, "The seal weakens. The stories are growing restless." Ngozi's heart raced. She crept backward, trying not to make a sound, but in her panic, her foot knocked against a broken pot. Crack, Adana's head jerked up. Her eyes met Ngozi's, the girl froze. Adana did not shout, she only looked at her for a long, heavy moment, then spoke in a low voice. "You see now why this burden is heavy. Stories do not like to be caged. And when they escape, they punish not just the keeper, but everyone around." Ngozi swallowed hard, fear clawing at her chest. But beneath the fear, something else stirred again, that same dangerous spark. Because even though she was terrified, she wanted to know more. She wanted to understand, and perhaps, deep inside, the stories wanted her too.